All right, here's video number 2, and it's your drawing of the typical bacterium. And this is, you're going to have this information on the drawing that you turn into me on Wednesday. It's on figure 2.1, I believe. So let's go through them. This is very, very, very important. You need to know every single thing that's written on this board, and you need to know what that thing does for the bacterium. So let's start with the capsule. I do the capsule pink. The capsule surrounds the cell wall, and it's organized into these layers of sticky sugars to help it stick to other surfaces. And it's this inherent protection against infection fighting agents. So when you use an antibiotic, it needs to make sure it's able to break through the capsule wall. And if it can't, then it can't fight that bacteria. And so the capsule is a protective coating. The next thing I want to talk about is the cell wall. The cell wall, I drew it in green. The cell wall basically gives the cell of the bacterium the shape. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But we categorize bacteria based on whether they have a cell wall or not, and the consistency of their cell wall. So if they don't have a cell wall, we put them in a certain group. And if they have a cell wall, we put those in a certain group, and then those have subgroups that we'll talk about later. So like I said earlier, the cell wall is what gives the bacterium cell its shape. It basically holds the contents of the cell together, and it regulates the water that's absorbed into the bacterium. Let's talk about the shapes that a bacteria can be. A bacteria can have a spherical shape, and if it's a spherical shape, which means it's pretty much perfectly round, you would see the word coccus or cocci on the end of the name. If it's rod-shaped, which is like a rod, then you would hear the name bacillus or bacilli on the end of the name. And if it's helical, which is kind of like a spiral pasta noodle, you would hear the word spirillum or spirilia on the end of the name of that bacteria. Next, let's talk about the plasma membrane. I drew it in blue. The plasma membrane is made up of phospholipids and proteins, and we'll talk about that later. But basically, those regulate what the cell takes in from the outside world. And sometimes it takes things in by force. The next thing is the cytoplasm. I just wrote cytoplasm in orange on the inside of the cell. And that is the semi-fluid substance in the cell that everything kind of floats around in. The next thing I want to talk about is the DNA. And it's the swirly stuff in the middle. And you guys all know that DNA holds all the information for life. Next, let's look at the ribosomes. They are the red dots in my picture. The ribosomes are the chemical factories in the cell that make proteins. And now let's look at the fimbria. The fimbria are like green little hairs sticking out. They're bristles outside the cell wall and the capsule. They are not, I repeat, not used for movement. They're used for grasping, and not all bacteria cells have them. If they do have them and they're used for grasping for the function of reproduction, then they have a special name called sex pili. Now remember, even if they're used for grasping and reproduction, they're still not sexually reproducing. Bacteria asexually reproduce. So if the fimbriae are used as sex pili, it's mainly to grasp the other cell and bring it close so that it can do the next step, which is form a conjugation tube if it's conjugating. We'll talk about more of that later. Let's see, the last thing I think I haven't mentioned is the flagellum. The flagellum is used for locomotion, and if it's not there, the bacteria can't move. Not all bacteria have flagellum. But if they do have a flagellum, there's a filament, a hook, and a basal body. And it works like an outboard motor. I have a really, really great video on this that I want you to watch as soon as you're done with this video. And it's called, oh boy, let me look. I can't look, I'll put it down. It's called, hold on a second, let me look at my notes. It's called Irreproducible Complexity. That's right. And it takes about 15 minutes, but it's well worth the watch. So watch that and then come to the next video.